Hey, what's up everybody and welcome back to News Dose. And if you've been following the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition, you probably know that it's been a little bit of a wild ride over the last few months, especially since the FTC moved to block the acquisition. Now, there seems to be some politics happening here under Lina Khan's leadership. The FTC has already lost several cases in court because of her stance against big tech mergers, rather than, actually following the law as it stands. So there are analysts out there that believes that the FTC will have an uphill battle against a relatively strong Microsoft case. Here's the thing though. In a new report by MLex, Microsoft is showing so much confidence in their case that they might just complete the buyout regardless of what the FTC does. Though if they go in this direction, there are some caveats to this in which I'll go over today. Also, it appears Nintendo could be reviving a beloved IP, which quite frankly, I think is very, very much needed and could diversify their library even more. First, though, before we get into any of that, let's just go and jump right into our first topic of the day, being about Persona 5 Royal. Really, if you've been following the channel for an extended amount of time, you probably know we've talked a lot about the need for Persona to go multi-platform. This has been so evident to most people out there. It's actually honestly absurd that it has taken this long, but now that we finally made it happen, to absolutely nobody's surprise at all, Persona 5 Royal has had a significant amount of success by going multi-platform. I know, who would have guessed it, right? But however, it was announced last month that within just 30 days of launching on Xbox, Nintendo, and PC, Persona 5 Royal sold 1 million units. So that was already a great start and everything, but we did get an additional update today. Atlus has now confirmed that Persona 5 Royal has sold 3.3 million units worldwide. Now, this does not include the vanilla version, but of course it does include the PlayStation 4 version, so do kind of keep that in mind. But this is still the power of going multi-platform. We saw the same thing happen with Persona 4 Golden. This all-time great beloved JRPG goes over to Steam and somehow manages to shock Sega and Atlus by selling an additional 1 million units. Yeah, again, who would have thought that if you release your games on more platforms, it'll sell more? Yeah, Square Enix, you might want to kind of listen to all this, but all in all, big congrats to Persona fans out there. I know a lot of us wanted this to happen. We've been calling for it for quite a while. Now more people can see exactly why these games are so good in the first place. And I think now the hope is just kind of that Sega and Atlus will continue to not only keep this franchise multi-platform going forward with games like Persona 6, but hey, don't stop there. We also need to pay attention to its parent, Shin Megami Tensei. Moving on, we also got some news for The Last of Us franchise. The Last of Us Part 2, of course, released back in 2020, but quietly in the background, Naughty Dog has been hard at work for their standalone multiplayer game. I think it's taken a little bit longer than some fans originally anticipated, but it sounds like the wait is actually close to over. They did share another concept art online today, which I'll go and include on screen here. This was shared through an official PlayStation blog post where they talked about the 10-year anniversary for The Last of Us. That's almost hard to believe, but it sounds like they plan on celebrating with plenty of news this year. This first starts off with The Last of Us Part 1's PC release. They did reconfirm it's slated for a March 3rd release, and they noted that more information for its features and required specs will be revealed sometime here soon. So if you're looking forward to the PC release, go ahead and keep your eyes on that. They also talked about the HBO show, and then of course, its multiplayer game mode. Not only did they reveal this new concept art, but they did also say this: "We're looking ahead to The Last of Us 10th anniversary in June, and we're so excited to share more with you about the future of this franchise. We'll have some fun surprises for you along the way, but later this year, we will begin to offer you some details on our ambitious The Last of Us multiplayer game. With a team led by Bennett, Joe, and Anthony Newman, the project is shaping up to be a fresh, new experience from our studio, but one rooted in Naughty Dog's passion for delivering incredible stories, characters, and gameplay." So, I mean, it looks like 2023 is going to be the year that we finally see something on this game. And something that it kind of sounds like they're trying to do here is interweave this multiplayer experience with some story-based elements. Now, we've seen some other multiplayer-driven games do this before, like Fortnite as an example, but with Naughty Dog's experience in storytelling, that is really what they're known for. It'll be quite interesting to see their take on a game like this. Yes, it's going to be different for Naughty Dog, no doubt about it. But at the same time, I know the original Last of Us Factions multiplayer game mode, that did have a bit of a cult following. So we know they can put together an enticing multiplayer together. Now we really just need to see if it can be its own catalyst for a large community over an extended amount of time. I'd say if anything though, it does sound like Sony and Naughty Dog are committing a lot of time and resources in getting this game right. We do know that Sony is putting a lot of effort into these live service games right now, and this Naughty Dog game, this is going to be one of its first big tests. Can they pull it off? And at the very least, it sounds like we're not going to have to wait much longer to find out for ourselves. Sounds like we will see this game soon enough, and for that matter, it also sounds like it's going to be a fun year for fans of the Last of Us franchise, including some surprises along the way. Okay, so let's go and get into the Xbox Activision Blizzard acquisition as Microsoft squares off against the FTC. This really has been the big story over the last month as information continues to churn, and the more that we've learned, the more it kind of feels Microsoft does indeed have a good case. The FTC, they've done a rather poor job at explaining why they want to stop this acquisition. They've even tried to put Nintendo in a completely different category as Xbox and PlayStation to make their point, as they claim Nintendo is not competition, and that's why they don't need something like Call of Duty. Granted, Microsoft's already tried to put Call of Duty on Nintendo, but we're going to ignore that, I guess. If anything, though, if we want to listen to what the FTC says here, I'd kind of argue that that just means that there's multiple ways to succeed in the game industry, which actually, that's pretty much what Microsoft has been saying all along. Either way, it's arguments like these that won't hold up in court for the FTC. There's just too many counterpoints that can be made by Microsoft. It really just kind of seems like the FTC is trying to create any possible narrative that they can. But something that we are starting to see is that Microsoft is gaining confidence and that they're becoming more aggressive with their approach. That's something that we saw a little bit in their pre-trial hearing. This happened yesterday, and we can go and take a look at some interesting things from the MLEX report. This was posted up by IDIS over on Resetera. IDIS, by the way, has done a phenomenal job throughout this entire acquisition, breaking down some different things. So big shout out there. Great job by IDIS. But let's go take a look at the post here. It says the report from MLEX about the pre-hearing has a few interesting bits of info that are new. Any potential remedies entered into with the EC and CMA will also be offered to the FTC. The deal is undergoing review over in Europe and the UK, and we are hoping that they will be resolved, and if there are remedies that are appropriate, we can come back to the FTC to talk about a resolution, said Beth Wilkinson, Microsoft lead counsel. James Weingarten, deputy chief trial counsel at the FTC, said that staff is always open to a remedy or settlement proposal during or before litigation, although there are no substantive conversations happening at this time. That's actually quite interesting. We'll come back to that. It continues on to say, though, Microsoft, ABK, and the FTC agreed to an expedited discovery schedule so they can start requesting and inspecting documents in a shortened time period. Beth Wilkinson told the administrative judge that if a resolution isn't reached with the FTC, the deal will go forward and close after a remedy is reached in all pending jurisdictions, but that the companies assumed the FTC would go to federal court in that case. She also said that that's why they wanted to front load the discovery just in case the FTC went to federal court, because Microsoft, Activision Blizzard King have a termination date of July 18th, 2023. We are preparing for all options, said Wilkinson. So this is actually quite fascinating, because what this means is that this case is largely reliant on what happens with the CMA and then also the EU. If it gets approved in those regions, what Microsoft plans to do is to complete the buyout in the United States regardless of what the FTC does. In other words, the FTC will either have to try for concessions similar to what we see in those regions, if any at all, that all remains to be seen, or they'll have to seek an injunction and fight in federal court where they'll then attempt to stop the buyout by legal means. Now, pretty much from everything that we've heard thus far, the FTC does not want to go to federal court because it is widely believed that they do not have a case that would hold up in federal court. Even worse for them is that if Activision Blizzard is indeed approved in other regions, it then makes Microsoft's case even stronger. So this could actually be a major problem for the FTC depending on what happens with other regulators. Now, again, that still all remains to be seen. But Microsoft is letting that be known. They're not backing down from the FTC. See, There is this theory floating around that the FTC was hoping that Microsoft would back down to any kind of pushback because this could go beyond that termination date. However, in this situation, Microsoft not only is countering that by completing the acquisition regardless of what the FTC does, but it also theoretically calls the FTC's bluff. It's no longer PR or mind games. In this situation, the FTC would be forced to put a case together that would hold up in court, and there are major questions on whether or not they can actually do that. I mean, this is not a slam dunk win for the FTC by any stretch of the means. Something else that I found kind of interesting about all this, though, is that now, all of a sudden, the FTC says that they're open for a settlement proposal. Now, that kind of strikes me odd, considering they refused to talk with Microsoft before attempting to sue them. This was a big story when all of this first happened because Microsoft wasn't happy that the FTC never sat down with them. If you remember, Microsoft was all in on making concessions. They made a contract with Nintendo, they tried to make a contract with Valve, and they attempted to get in touch with Sony as well. But the FTC, they just didn't sit down with them. So it's kind of strange that now all of a sudden, they're saying that they're open for business? I mean, the timing just seems kind of odd here, but I guess we'll see what happens going forward. I think right now this story kind of shifts over to what happens with the CMA later this month. A lot of what happens with the FTC seems very reliant on what happens in other regions. It, however, does sound like Microsoft is confident with what will happen with the EU and the CMA, but I guess we'll see soon enough, and as always, I'll keep you updated as we hear more. Now, we do also have something happening with Nintendo, as it's been spotted that they are working with Bandai Namco on yet another game. The two have fared extremely well together. People often forget this, but Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a Nintendo and Bandai Namco collaboration. You also have Pokken, and then on top of that, Bandai Namco has also helped out with other Nintendo IPs, such as Mario Kart 8, they've worked on ARMS, and even Mario Kart Tour. Meanwhile, people are freaking out about a Perfect Dark collaboration. Yeah, this stuff is pretty common with the game industry, as I've said time and time again, but I digress. What's happening here is that yet another job listing has popped up revealing that Bandai Namco is working on a 3D action game commissioned by none other than Nintendo. Now, there were previous job listings in 2022 alluding to this as well, but as you can see here, they're not even trying to hide it. They did directly mention that Nintendo is commissioning whatever this game is. So now the question just kind of becomes, what Nintendo IP could this be? And the timing of all of this does seem to have fans speculating about one specific game, and that's actually one of my favorite 3DS games ever made, Kid Icarus Uprising. This game really just was absolutely fantastic, but the reason fans believe that it could be referring to Kid Icarus is because Sakurai recently, in a video, seemingly teased a Kid Icarus port for home consoles. While talking about Kid Icarus in one of his videos, he ended the video by saying this: "It sure would be nice to play Kid Icarus Uprising on a home console. I wonder if someone out there will ever port it." Now, he said all this with a sly smile on his face, hence the speculation here. It does very much appear that he's teasing some type of Kid Icarus Uprising port. Whether that's in relation to this, that remains to be seen, but honestly, I think that this would be absolutely amazing. I think Kid Icarus Uprising is a great game that not near enough people played on the 3DS. Graphically, it looks great, and I think that it could translate well over to home consoles. I think that it also would help diversify Nintendo's library even further. It's kind of like this third-person shooter with some aerial combat thrown in as well. Being on the 3DS, though, this type of game, it did rely on using the stylus to aim, which admittedly I think worked well, but at the same time, if it comes over to home console, it could end up having a more traditional control scheme, which I think a lot of fans would enjoy. You look at something like Zelda Skyward Sword and what they did with that HD remaster and how it had a more traditional control scheme. A lot of people really enjoyed that, and I think you could see something similar with Kid Icarus Uprising. Nonetheless, though, as a fan of the original, what I'd personally like to see here is for it to come back, succeed, and then maybe we could get a direct sequel for their next console. That, to me, that would be a huge win, in my opinion. Going back to Bandai Namco, though, there is another connection here. If you think about it, Sakurai has a great relationship with them because the two work together on Smash Bros. Ultimate. So if he has a desire to bring back Kid Icarus Uprising, which, I mean, it kind of sounds like he does, you would have to think that Bandai Namco would be very fitting here. Of course, though, this could really be anything. This is all just kind of speculation for the time being, but what we do know is that Bandai Namco is working with Nintendo on something yet again. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day. They were asked you all, do you think Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will be the final major release by Nintendo for the Switch before focusing on its successor? This isn't a rumor mill right now. It has been claimed by 2 different journalists with good reputations that this is actually the case, but I wanted to hear you all's opinions on this, and as you can see here, 63% of you all do believe that will be the case, while 31% of you said no. So yeah, it sounds like the majority of you do believe that the Switch will be winding down throughout 2023 and saving their bigger releases for their next console. Now, with that said, that doesn't necessarily mean Nintendo doesn't have anything planned for this year after Tears of the Kingdom. We've been talking about some different GameCube remasters as of recent. Those could very much hit this year. But however, games like Metroid Prime 4 or the next big Mario might be held for that eventual successor whenever that ends up releasing. I think Chokebite Backlog said it well here, though, as they say, depends on how you define major. Metroid Prime 4 could be a major title for some, even though Metroid as a franchise doesn't sell as much. For me, the rumored remake of Genealogy of the Holy War would be a major title too. No, I don't think Tears of the Kingdom will be the last one personally. We are still getting Metroid Prime 4 and a Fire Emblem game, Pikmin 4, etc. The only one I'd be surprised about is the next 3D Mario. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo put out a Switch successor and then made the next 3D Mario cross-generation. And that is actually a very real possibility. We could see some cross-generation games, including maybe the next 3D Mario. Nintendo has done that in the past with Zelda Twilight Princess and also Breath of the Wild. So they could do something very similar here, especially if their next console ties in nicely with the Switch. I could actually see a situation where they still sell current Switch models for an extended period of time as a more budget-friendly option. But as you mentioned here, this question also depends on what you consider major titles. That is subjective, especially when you talk about something like Metroid as an example. I myself would consider Metroid Prime a major title, but you're right. It's not really on the same level as something like Mario or Zelda per se. So yeah, that can be viewed in different ways. One way or the other, though, it does sound like a lot of you do expect 2023 to maybe be the swan year for the Nintendo Switch. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.